Welcome everybody. We're so thrilled that you could join us today for our second webinar focused on community wealth building, powered by RBC. So really, to generate healthy communities, we need to ensure that everyone has opportunities to participate and contribute. And employment is an important part of this strategy. It's not a new issue, but leveraging a coordinated community wealth building approach will allow us to reimagine how we ensure that those who have been excluded or marginalized by our existing systems will be part of an equitable economic recovery. And building stronger communities can come through that as well. So today we're going to hear about how we can build a more equitable workforce through the intentional, inclusive approaches and by the leveraging of local resources. My name is Sharon Bruce, and I'm the Senior Director of Community Initiatives here at United Way East Ontario, and I'm pleased to be your MC for today's event. It is with profound respect that we acknowledge the privilege to be operating and performing on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. We recognize the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island who have been thriving on this land for centuries. We also recognize Canada's history of colonization and the ongoing violence against Indigenous peoples and their culture. As guests on this land, we promise to walk gently and with respect. Now let us begin today's event. So while I have the opportunity, let me run through some of the Zoom reminders. So again, I did remind you earlier, we have our live transcription function available for those who'd like to use it. So you can turn that on for yourself by selecting CC or live transcription from the Zoom options. So again, I encourage you to check that out. But we want to make sure that everyone is comfortable and gets the most out of the platform that we're using today. You can use the chat box function at any point to get our team's attention and help should you need it. So first, I'll ask to make sure that you're on mute during the event today. And again, given the size of the event, we encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions or comment. But of course, the option of unmuting yourself and asking a question is also available. For you tweeters out there, our hashtag for today is #BuildingCommunityWealth. And I encourage that if you hear a great idea or something comes to mind for yourself, let's share it on social to get others thinking about it as well. And we know that being on camera for a lengthy period of time can be challenging. So feel free to turn your camera on or off, but if possible, try to be on if you're asking a question to our panelists. And we are going to be taking some photos through the event. So shortly we'll look for a group photo and then may grab some screenshots of our presenters as well. And you'll have noted that the event is being recorded, and we'll look to share it after the event for those who want to revisit the content or share it with their teams. So as mentioned, we'd like to grab a photo for our event today. If you'd like to be in the photo, I'd ask you to please turn on your camera, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Haley Roboto, to take the picture. I'll give you a second to turn on your camera.
Yeah, I see a lot of cameras going on all of a sudden, so I'll just give it a second until my screen pops up. It looks like we've got a full screen, so I'm just going to take a picture in about 3, 2, oh wait, hold on one sec. We'll do 3, 2, 1. All right, I think we're all good there. So I might grab a couple more throughout the day today, but I just wanted to have that one with everyone's smiling face, and I'll hand it back to you, Shannon.
Great, thank you. Everyone can move again, right? You got in that mode of just freezing. So now let's take a look at our agenda. So you would have received the agenda as well as the impressive bios of our wonderful speakers today, but we'll also add it to the chat box now, along with the helpful document of key terms. So very quickly regarding the agenda, we're going to do a quick overview of community wealth building and our specific topic for today, the equitable workforce. We'll then welcome Louise Summers from RBC Royal Bank to share how they are making it happen in their organization. Next, Haley Heckman from Causeway Work Center will share more about the role that social enterprise can play in workforce development. And we'll then come to a panel of my colleagues from United Way who lead our community-wide initiatives focused on employment to share how they can help you attract and retain talent that you may be currently missing out on, as well as answer some of your questions. We'll then hear a success story sharing the steps that an employer took not only to attract, but also retain and promote diverse talent. I also want to say thank you to our sponsor, RBC. So not only are they speaking here today, but they've been a major partner with United Way East Ontario in a number of initiatives, including those focused on community wealth building. And we sincerely thank you for empowering these conversations. Okay, are we ready? Let's get started. A little bit of thinking to get us started today. So again, we're focusing on the equitable workforce. Imagine a workplace where we're attracting the best talent without barriers, whether they're real or perceived. To do this, we know that many of our partners in the community, who are also employers, are working to be more inclusive in their workforce development strategies. But we're all at different phases of this journey. So I'm curious, does your organization have a strategy for attracting and retaining a diverse workforce? And you'll see a few options pop up. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to take a look at this and select where you feel you're at. Maybe you don't really have a full view on this in your position, but just on a quick thought, quick glance, where's your organization at with this? Excellent. Great to see so many answers popping in. I'll leave it for another 10 seconds or so. Great. Thank you. So I'll share these results with everybody. And you know what? The answer actually trended really quickly that yes, we're working on it was a very common answer. So we do have a couple where it's noted that it's fully developed, and a few no, we're planning on building one, and no, we don't have one. But I think, yes, we are working on it. So again, I'm encouraged to see this as part of our conversation today, because really it's going to help set some of you up in terms of where do we need to go on this journey and what types of questions can we ask? But more importantly, what are some of the resources and partners in the community who can help provide some guidance on this? So excellent. Thank you for that. So we want to again set the foundation for what is community wealth building. Again, we recognize some of you have been on this journey with us or even on your own for a long time, and some people are new to this conversation. But community wealth building is a people-centered approach to local economic development that aims to reorganize local economies so that wealth isn't extracted, but rather redirected back into communities. It's also partly focused on the economic power of local institutions to support these local areas and their communities. So we commonly refer to these organizations as anchor institutions. And so the way in which these large, locally rooted organizations, so think about councils, hospitals, universities, colleges, housing associations, the way that these types of organizations spend their money, how they employ people, use their land, use their property and financial assets can make a huge difference in a local community. And so the different tools that are available is around finance. So we can increase flows of investment within local economies by harnessing and recirculating the wealth that exists as opposed to attracting capital. The land and property, we can deepen the function and ownership of local assets held by anchor institutions so that financial and social gain is harnessed by the local citizens. When we think about spending, we can utilize public sector procurement and commissioning to develop dense local supply chains of businesses likely to support good employment and retain work locally. When we think about a generative economy, so develop and grow locally owned enterprises, which are more financially generative for the local economy, locking wealth into place. And workforce. So exercising fair employment practices and working to develop a more just labor market to improve the prospects and well-being of the local people. So today, we're focusing on workforce and the equitable workforce. When we think of this in the lens of community wealth building, there are a couple of ways that I want you to think about how we build and leverage human capital. In our current systems, there are many individuals who face barriers to participating, including people with disabilities, new Canadians, racialized individuals, Indigenous people, those living in poverty, and many other groups. We can use an intentional practices to include these people and lift them from poverty to possibility in a thriving local community. We also have opportunities to drive change and reimagine outcomes through both traditional employment, as well as leveraging things such as community benefits agreements, which we'll focus on more at our webinar in May. But let's look first at that traditional employment lens. So again, the first way we can drive change is to look at practices within existing employment structures. How do we build processes that can include everyone? And not just in terms of recruitment, but from recruitment to retirement. So again, written policies can support these activities. Government and institutional policies can be crucial in making this happen. And some of the things that we need to think about and assess for our organizations is, do we know if our current outreach for talent reaches a broad and diverse audience? Or is it limited based on structural limitations, whether it be accessibility or just audiences that certain things may reach? Once people are recruited, how do we ensure that they have equitable access to the systems for career development and promotion? So again, you may be hiring more diverse individuals, but how do you ensure that they're represented in the C-suite, as an example? How do you create space for diverse views, experiences, and ideas to be respected in both work tasks, but also the overall work culture? So as an example there, if you're having a training provided by an outside contractor, did you ensure that it can be available in accessible formats? And those are only a few examples of what we can consider. And again, we'll dig deeper into this as we go through our conversations today. Then we can also look at the lens of community benefit agreements. A community benefits agreement is a proven way to provide jobs and other benefits for community residents. So in many countries, communities demand CBAs when new industrial, commercial, institutional developments occur, or when public sector projects are built. And they can be defined by things including signed, legally enforceable agreements, having clear monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, having specificity to a particular construction project. So rather than an institutional policy, so like a big project that's happening in a community. And a CBA details in writing the specific benefits that a community will receive from a given development project. So these could include things such as equitable hiring practices, funding for training, neighborhood improvements, support for social enterprises, amongst other things. So as we think about this, it's important to note that we can build these types of agreements to make action happen on the demand side, but we also need to ensure that the supply side of talent, the people, are ready to meet the demands of these agreements. We know that there can be many benefits to these strategies, but they're also complex, which is why we need to find ways to continue to work together and learn from each other in East Ontario. And again, we'll get more into the specifics of CBAs in our next webinar, but it's important to keep in mind as we discuss opportunities to developing an equitable workforce and the role that community wealth building strategies can play. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce our first speaker. And I'm so pleased to introduce you to Louise Summers, Regional Vice President of RBC's Ottawa Central Region. She is responsible for the overall operation, business performance, and community presence, as well as the integration of all partner business lines and services. Louise's leadership and community engagement reflects a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. She is a member of Hire Immigrants Ottawa's Ottawa Employer Council of Champions and was recently the executive champion and ally of RBC's Pride Employee Resource Group for Ontario North and East. These are just a few of the highlights of Louise's contributions to our communities. Thank you, Louise, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Can you hear me well? Excellent. So as we gather virtually today, I also want to offer my gratitude to the people who have walked these lands before us. And I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Donc, bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir de me joindre avec vous aujourd'hui pour parler de l'importance de créer une main-d'œuvre équitable essentielle pour la santé de nos communautés. It's been a tough couple of years for sure, the pandemic and the occupation on top of that. And as a community and as leaders, we are living through some very unique times. People are exhausted. Organizations who help the most vulnerable in our communities have been challenged too. It's clear all of this has had a great impact on people who are already marginalized. At the same time, I feel like we are at a turning point. We have an opportunity to reflect on what we can do better, what we can all do to ensure a more inclusive recovery. We have a real opportunity to truly understand what diversity is, what inclusion and equity mean, and how this will contribute to community wealth building. We've had some tough conversations these past 2 years. Conversations brought on by the heartbreaking discovery of human remains of Indigenous children at residential school sites and the brutal murder of George Floyd. These shocks led all of us to pause and reflect on what is going on in our society, in our own communities, and in our workplaces. It also made me reflect on the privilege I have as a white, cisgender, able-bodied woman with access to education, a roof over my head, a good job, My entire life, I've enjoyed privileges associated with belonging to the majority. But the reality is different for many around us. In fact, I want to share a story about my colleague Madeleine, who's had the courage to speak up and talk about these issues head-on. Je vous parle de Madeleine Magny. Elle est directrice d'une de nos succursales. Elle est partie de l'Afrique, en Cameroun, pour poursuivre ses études au Canada sur une bourse pour le basketball. Et il faut le faire, hein? Elle a commencé comme étudiante à RBC. Ensuite, elle a pris un rôle de conseillère financière et maintenant, Maddy est directrice d'une de mes succursales. Au moment où la question du racisme systémique était à l'avant-plan, elle a ouvert un dialogue avec mon équipe de gestion et elle a partagé son expérience, ce qu'elle vit en tant que personne noire au Canada. So Maddy is a branch manager here in Ottawa. She started as an international student and grew up in our organization. And today she leads one of our most important branches in the region. She was the first to speak up and open a dialogue around the murder of George Floyd and what it meant for her as a Black woman. She created a space for dialogue. She shared her experience as a Black woman here in Ottawa with our leadership team, and this was the spark that led to a much broader conversation about systemic racism and the Black experience in Canada among all of our colleagues throughout Ontario North and East. More than 500 people and teams were on that call, and it was a defining moment for all of us. What she and other Black colleagues shared that day was heartbreaking and sobering, and it made me realize that I have had blinders on. I didn't really realize and understand what was going on in my community or what people of color experience every day. I had to ask myself some tough questions. Do our people feel welcome at work? Do my colleagues feel they can be their true and authentic self at work in our communities? And where am I on my journey to bring more inclusive and understanding of others, to being an ally and speaking up for inclusion? Diversity is the presence of differences within a given setting, including the workplace. It can mean differences in race, ethnicity, gender, or any other number of visible and invisible traits. Inclusion means ensuring that people feel a sense of belonging and support from the organization where everyone feels welcome. Equity goes a step further, putting programs in place to ensure equitable treatment. I've learned that while diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice more and more people are making, a choice more and more businesses need to make. It's become a business imperative to attract and retain talent, to attract and retain clients, and to drive innovation and growth. You may be thinking, I'm a small business or a community organization. I don't have the same resources as a company like RBC does. So why should this matter to me? I recognize that some organizations are at different stages on the diversity, equality, and inclusion journey. Later in this talk, I'll be sharing some strategies, resources, and actions that organizations of all sizes can leverage. Here are just a few reasons why making your workplace more diverse, equitable, and inclusive is good for your organization. First, it's good for business. According to the consulting firm McKinsey, more diverse teams lead to better performance, improved problem solving, more creativity, and better understanding the needs of consumers. Second, it helps position you as an employer of choice at a time where businesses in many sectors are reporting labor shortages. The reality is, our population is aging. There are many retirements on the horizon, plus there's a real shift in skills required for the jobs of tomorrow. You may be feeling this yourself, having a hard time attracting and retaining employees. Third, it will help you to attract talent. There is untapped potential among underprivileged groups in our labor force today. Here are a few examples. According to RBC Economics, there's a potential to attract 1.2 million more women to the labor force. To close this women's participation rate gap, we need to create the right conditions for women in the workplace, including childcare, more flexible work arrangements, and paths to advancement. Indigenous Canadians are the fastest growing youth segment of our population. Indigenous young people represent a significant source of untapped potential, but they need access to education, and training to develop skills for the jobs of tomorrow. To help address this gap, the United Way of East Ontario has created an Indigenous Employment Advisory Leadership Table. It works alongside local Indigenous communities to bring together employers, stakeholders, and Indigenous youth to better understand labour market issues and solutions in Eastern Ontario. I'm proud to share my colleague Nazim Ladha, our human resource business partner, sits on the table as an employer representative. It's given RBC a better appreciation of the issues Indigenous individuals face and has helped uncover employment opportunities. Here's another striking stat. Almost 1 in 5 Canadians have some form of disability, visible or invisible, like learning disabilities or mental health issues. And my colleague, Natasha Lemay-Riom, Regional Vice President for Ottawa Western Valley, is also in the Ottawa area, sits on the Employment Accessibility Resource Network, EARN, steering committee. They are also a United Way partner. Plus, Natasha is executive champion for RBC's REACH Employee Resource Group. This is a group that aims to eliminate the stereotypes and stigma associated with people with disabilities, like raising awareness about adaptations that will make our workplace more welcoming for everyone. So, Canada's future labour force will be increasingly diverse. According to an RBC study, over 1 million visible minority youth will hit working age over the next decade. Immigration is also accounting for a rising share of expected Canadian population growth, and ensuring that skills of visible minorities workers are realigned to their work productive means. Essentially, better utilizing Canada's supply of labour would lift GDP by nearly $30 billion per year. The need to fully leverage our available talent pool has never been greater. So in addition to these gaps in our labour force, Canada has ambitious goals to attract immigrants. In fact, our population growth comes mostly through immigration, international students, temporary workers, newcomers. This talent pool is essential to grow our economy and to the future of work in Canada. When you look at newcomers, most arrive in Canada with professional training and education for jobs here, but they earn less. They are often overqualified and forced to take lower-paying jobs to make ends meet. It's a challenge for them to get their education and accreditation recognized here in Canada. I see this myself when I'm looking at candidates from other countries who are highly educated and have significant work experience. It's a long-standing issue for immigrants being underemployed relative to their credential and skills, and this costs our Canadian economy as much as $50 billion per year. Newcomers are often entrepreneurs too. They are more likely to launch their own businesses, and they tend to grow more quickly. They contribute to our economy. Plus, they will hire other newcomers because they recognize their skills and qualifications and work ethic. And I see this all the time right here in Ottawa. Some of our clients come to us wanting to open small businesses and start operating maybe a farm or a franchise. Others open retail stores catering to their cultural community and contributing to creating vibrant neighborhoods. We watch them grow and become successful business owners. There are many inspiring stories out there. But how do we ensure newcomers and people of diverse backgrounds have access to opportunities? I've had the pleasure to work with amazing organizations here in Ottawa, like Hire Immigrants Ottawa, World Skills, La CESOC, YMCA, that support newcomers in community. In fact, these organizations have helped me attract dozens of very talented people to RBC, people with rich work and life experience, people who are so keen and ready to make a difference, to give their very best. But it's made me so proud to see them progress in our organization and go on to other things. Remember my story of Madeleine. And I have so many wonderful examples right here in the Ottawa Central Market. I'm going to introduce you to Moji. He arrived in Canada in 2019 and started networking immediately. He attended an RBC webinar through the Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization mentorship program, and we hired him as a client advisor. Supported by his leaders and colleagues at RBC, he obtained his designation as a mutual fund representative, and I'm very proud to say that he has just been promoted to banking advisor. He continues to pay it forward by helping other newcomers in the community by joining the events that he originally attended. My team is recruiting all the time, mostly hiring for entry-level positions. But we look for individuals who will represent the communities we operate in and speak the languages. I want people who are active in the community because they will build on those connections and build stronger communities. In my experience, good people know good people. And more often than not, these talented individuals become top performers. I am also really proud to share that just this month here in Ottawa, we launched a brand new team made up of advisors who are all newcomers themselves and are ready to help our newcomer clients settle in our city. They are newcomers helping newcomers, dedicated to providing advice and guidance and access to resources on things like the local and Canadian culture, the job market, and understanding financial literacy and more. Let me tell you about the woman leading this initiative, Heidi Hemden. She's a newcomer herself. She arrived in Canada in 2008 with her young family, looking for a better life. She walked into an RBC branch to open an account, struck up an amazing relationship with the advisor there who helped her and her husband open their first Canadian bank account. But the conversation went beyond banking, talking about neighborhoods, schools, the job market. She took a lower-level job to get her foot in the door and some Canadian experience. And a few years later, Heidi came to RBC. Today, she's a branch manager. She has built strong relationships with newcomer organizations in Ottawa. She gives back, mentors, and helps newcomers learn about banking, about the community, and all things Canadian. She lived this newcomer experience firsthand, understands the barriers, and now is helping other newcomers settle here in Canada. So what can you do? Employers need to understand this. Being inclusive and equitable is not only the right thing to do, but it represents a significant strategic opportunity for growth. It's no longer a nice to have. Your customer base mirrors your community. Your people, your organization needs to reflect your community too. So what steps can you take as a business owner, a recruiter, or as a manager? RBC has been recognized as one of the most diverse and inclusive publicly traded companies in the world. We got there through very deliberate actions and commitments to increase diversity at levels of our organization, including in leadership. And we've made significant efforts to educate our leaders and to remove biases from our recruiting and hiring process. So things like all of our leaders took a series of courses on recognizing unconscious bias in the recruitment process, taking action to recruit from a more diverse base to diversify the talent pool. For me personally, I'm working hard at ensuring more diverse leadership around my management table. And there's more work to do, absolutely, but we're taking deliberate steps to get there. So here are a few takeaways and things you can do. Diversify your talent pool. Do what you can to broaden your own network. Look beyond traditional channels and the usual job boards. For example, we do lots of work with local organizations to help with mentorship and skill building. Organizations like I shared before, World Skills, CISOC, YMCA, just to name a few. It's so rewarding for our people too. People like Maddie, Moji, and Heidi, and so many others of all backgrounds. They mentor. They love giving back, whether they work for RBC or not. They help newcomers on their journey, and it's a great way to pay it forward. You can work with local colleges and universities like La Cité and University of Ottawa, Algonquin College. This helps you identify diverse talent early through co-op programs and hiring summer students. You want to give people a path to be successful so they will want to stay with your organization. Another great example is that what we call employee resource groups, ERGs. These groups share common interests and help members develop personally and professionally. They provide access to networking and professional development opportunities, mentoring, coaching, and engagement within the community. There are employee resources groups for Indigenous employees, women, minorities, and newcomers to Canada, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ+ individuals, caregivers, and employees who are next gen, those that are early in their career. These groups create a sense of belonging. They create blogs, host network events. They share the meaning of special cultural celebrations. Through these groups, the whole organization can learn more about each other and appreciate the different cultures and communities at work. For 6 years, I was the executive lead for our Pride Employee Resource Group. For me, as an ally, I was most proud of how we created an environment where everyone could learn, ask questions. By doing so, we help people feel like they can be their authentic selves at work because we were talking about it. Whether it was talking about drag queens, we held drag queen bingos, transgender issues, the challenge of same-sex couples having children, these topics were openly discussed. This made our environment way more inclusive so people could feel safe to be who they are when they come to work, and they could bring their very best selves to work and feel accepted. Whether you are a leader or a colleague taking part in these activities or supporting your team, this is a great way to be an ally. At RBC, diversity and inclusion learning is embedded in ongoing training tailored to the role of an individual. Every individual completes anti-racism and code of conduct training. Recently, an organization we collectively committed to completing the 4 seasons of reconciliation. In fact, this same course was made available by RBC to the general public. At RBC, we encourage also a strong speak-up culture. We encourage our people to speak up if they see or hear something that isn't quite right. It's about listening to that little voice that tells us to pause and to think about whether something feels right. In fact, we have a whole series of videos and tools that are on our external website, that will be provided to you at the end of this session. We work every day to foster an inclusive culture because we know that's how we'll ensure our people are happy, engaged, and ready to be their best for our clients. This doesn't just apply at work. We take this message to the broader community like I'm doing here this morning. But RBC, being inclusive is at the core of who we are. It's in our DNA, and it's good for our people, it's good for our clients, it's good for business too. We want a workforce that reflects our clients, our communities, and we want to attract the very best people too. Our goal is to foster an inclusive culture where people of diverse backgrounds and abilities, include newcomers to Canada, can be successful. As a leading employer in Canada and around the globe, it's our responsibility to use our voice to inspire more inclusivity at work and in our communities. Because we know strong, equitable, prosperous communities are in everyone's best interest. And so, as we work towards a more inclusive recovery, let's reimagine our communities to be more equitable for everyone. Thank you, merci.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Louise. Really just such amazing insights and those specific examples to learn from. And I know what you've shared today, again, it just so many great ideas and examples, and it's only a highlight of the work that you and the team at RBC are doing across East Ontario and beyond. So thank you for that. And we appreciate the tools that you've shared. So we will share those after the session, but we've also placed them in the chat as well if folks want to take a look at those sooner. But again, thank you for sharing that. And again, I saw a great conversation happening in the chat around the value of those specific examples that were shared. So again, really appreciate that piece. I now want to welcome Haley Heckman, the Executive Director for Causeway Work Center. She has over 10 years of experience working in the social services sector with an aim for promoting thoughtful leadership and aligned decision-making for mental wellness, disability, and youth organizations. She's going to help us better understand the role of social enterprise in equitable workforce development. Welcome, Haley.
Thank you so much. Perfect. So my name is Haley. I'm here from Causeway Work Center. Just to give you a little overview on the work that we do at Causeway, we're a nonprofit organization that helps people with mental illness and other challenges find meaningful, rewarding work and live more independently. You can go to the next slide. And our mission is building better communities by employing each person's abilities. And just so you are aware, we have a whole ton of different programs and services that we offer surrounding that mission. So we have in-house employment supports, which I'm going to talk to a bit more today. So our social enterprises that we run, providing skills building opportunities for people in our community, as well as in-community employment support. So employment programs connecting people with work out in community, placement programs, and entrepreneurship, and wraparound support. So recognizing that there are intersected needs of the people that we're working with within the larger community, making sure that they have access to other resources as needed as well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about an overview of work integrated social enterprise, what that is, some of the research that has come out over the last several years in this area, and then also provide you with some examples of what we're doing here locally in Ottawa. So what is work integrated social enterprise? Essentially, it is a social enterprise that has a social mission to directly support vulnerable community members who are facing exclusion from the labor market. So in these ways, work integrated social enterprises, they produce and sell goods and services, and they support people in a paid capacity to experience integration into work environments and into society. Different social enterprises in this area have different goals. Some of them focus on long-term, secure, stable employment, and some are focused on supporting transition into the labor market. So supporting people to develop the skills that they need to transition into in-community employment. So recently, there's been some research in this area, specifically around social enterprises that have a focus in creating employment opportunities. So they looked at the social determinants of health and found that there was some positive impact from accessing this type of work on mental health, on self-reliance, on self-esteem, on health behaviors, reduction of stigma, and building of social capital. So really having that opportunity to work in a space that is supportive and inclusive and build skills and resiliency had a positive impact on the health of those who were engaging in these programs. And just a little bit more research that has been done over the last several years. So actually, Causeway was a part of the Queen's WISE study, which focused on people facing labor market barriers due to mental illness. There were 7 organizations across Ontario that participated in this study, which was over 5 years. So it started in 2017. It's actually just wrapping up this year in 2022. They're just finalizing a few more of their longitudinal interviews over the course of the last 5 years. And really some interesting conclusions are coming out of that study, as well as simultaneously a study that was supported as well by ESDC at the University of Toronto, focused on training for at-risk youth. So just some studies that you can take a look at when you're getting to know this idea of work integrated social enterprise. So what is the impact of this type of social enterprise on equitable workforce development? Well, there's a whole bunch of impacts that we're noticing. Skills development and experiential learning being one of them. So a place where people can come in, build some skills, whether they are transferable skills into multiple industry or industry-specific skills, have an opportunity to try new things and different types of roles and tasks and responsibilities within that social enterprise is really a great opportunity to build on the skill set that they may already have or a completely new one. Experience and resume building, so that block of time spent within an organization, gaining that those skills and experience, and also being able to have support in building resumes in areas maybe where they are looking to invest in a particular sector. They may have a gap that exists on their resume at this point, and being able to fill that in order to move along into community employment. It builds confidence and self-determination. There, in particular, with an organization like ours, there's access to wraparound supports and to customized path planning. So being able to work simultaneously with someone who gets to know you in other capacities and can really work with you on what is the transferability of the skills that you've developed in this space that you can take into community. There's income stability and financial literacy. There's career opportunity identification and tailored training programs for the future. So being able to identify what are the things that you really took value from this experience. Are there strengths or areas of interest? Are there places that you want to continue to learn and engage in training programs or in education? So where can we continue to support that career identification along the way? And then belonging and team building. So being able to be a part of a team environment, to have access to both supports from staff and from colleagues within that environment are all really incredible impacts. So just some examples from Causeway. We have 4 social enterprises that we run. One of them, our longest standing social enterprise, Crackers Catering, has been around since 1999. These are some old pictures because we're still transitioning back into catering. We've been doing a lot of food service throughout the pandemic, but really a space where people can come in and build that skills development in the food service sector. The next one is Goodnatured Groundskeeping, which has been around since 2008. They do a lot of landscaping and lawn maintenance for housing organizations across the city. So they work with Ottawa Community Housing, with Nepean Housing, Gloucester Housing, making sure that they have the opportunity to have clean and well-maintained spaces in those housing complexes. We have Cycle Salvation, which has been around since 2009, so shortly after Good Nature, that takes bikes that otherwise would end up in the landfill and fixes them up and puts them out for resale. So really being able to build both on the mechanical skills and also the retail customer service skills for people who are working in that space. And then most recently, we launched Causeway Commercial Cleaning in 2021. So a space where we're focused on deep cleaning and regular sanitization and are working with businesses across the city. And so we just had a short video to share a little bit about one person's experience working within our Crackers Catering social enterprise. I don't think we can hear it.
Sorry, I'm just going to share it again so I can share the sound. Apologies.
No problem.
What I was like then and what I'm like now. It wasn't a dark place, wasn't in the hospital for a year. I got in for an interview and I got the job. And so now I'm in the head baker. My job is to make sure that everything gets out on time. It's given me so much confidence and so much, just a belief in myself I never had before. Work, regardless, that really says it all.
And just lastly, some next steps. So we are still working on, how do we continue to improve our work integrated social enterprises? What can we do to enhance the experience opportunities for people? How do we find, the right mix between supporting people in the long term and supporting them to transition into community? So we actually just completed our 2022 to 2025 strategic plan, and we had some areas that were specifically focused in this. So looking at our long-term viability for our social enterprises, their sustainability, their potential for growth, their alignment with opportunities in the broader workforce. So how do we ensure that we're continuously keeping up with the skills that are needed to work in certain industries and supporting people both in transferable skills, the soft skills, and also in the industry specific skills that they would need to transition into the work that they're interested in, as well as creating effective bridges to employment. So how are we connecting with others who work in the industry to support that ease of transition, whether it is looking at catering as an example? Are there catering businesses that we can collaborate with to create that pipeline for people into that field if that's where they're interested in moving after they've gained some experience with us? We're looking at establishing a collective framework for our social enterprises, so enhancing skills development on our back end. So looking at the fact that we have 4 social enterprises, they're all businesses. How do we support people to get that back end experience, whether it's in social media marketing, it's in administration, payroll, sales, inventory management? How are we utilizing the functions within our businesses more effectively to bring people on to gain those skills as well, so they can transition those into community employment? And then continuing to link the work that we're doing with industry employers, so that that direct line of contact and connection with other employers who are working in this space, to ensure that, as I mentioned, that we're building the skills that people need to transfer into those community organizations, but also that we're really working with people on career development. When we were going through this process of developing our strategic plan, we did a lot of engagement, including engagement with those who are working in our social enterprises and those who are accessing our other employment programs. And one of the areas of gap that we really identified was being able to support people in finding immediate work has a tremendous benefit. They're able to access, immediate income. They're able to have access to learning opportunities and skills development. But where we're really lacking is that ability to support people in the long term and finding career trajectory and identifying what are their strengths that they want to build towards, where are promotional opportunities, where can we really identify where their strengths and their abilities are going to be best suited in the long term, and how do we support them to build not only the skills but the networks that they need to be able to transition into that career path moving forward. So that's an area that we're really looking to invest time and energy as an organization as we move into the next couple of years. And that is all for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Haley. Again, such a great opportunity to better understand the role of social enterprise. But again, some of those complexities and considerations, right? I really appreciate the pieces about the long term of how you're helping an individual develop, but then also having that influence on the kind of on the ecosystem as well. So thank you for that. And I do know that you have another meeting to head off to, but I want to pause it here. This is today, we're really kind of setting the framework and the ground for some of the conversations here, and we can continue these beyond today. We do have our community wealth building champions table, which I know, Haley, you're a part of, so thank you for that. And these are the type of conversations that we'll dig even deeper into to figure out how do we systemically include this and help the system evolve, but also how do we help these programs and pieces in place that will help develop the talent pools that are otherwise overlooked at this stage. So again, look forward to continuing these conversations in those meetings and beyond. And we did also share some of the studies that you provided were shared in the chat, but we will send those out afterwards as well. So again, thank you so much, Haley, for providing this insight to us. It was such useful information as we move forward on the conversation.
Thank you.
Great. Now I am going to welcome my colleague, Somia Khan. She's a champion and an outspoken advocate for inclusion and women's empowerment with a key focus on social impact. In 2020, she launched the Build Up Women Speaker Series and has since expanded the conversations to include youth and others who face barriers in our communities. Somia is going to be hosting a panel conversation for us today focused on the employment tables that we have at United Way East Ontario. And so welcome to you, Somia, and our panelists.
Hello, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for a wonderful introduction, Shannon. I'm so thrilled to moderate today's conversation on equitable workforce development and really take a deep dive into the vital role that intersectionality plays in equitable workforce development, as well as discuss the accessibility piece to these impactful initiatives across East Ontario as well. So please join me in welcoming my inspiring colleagues, Angie Perkins, who's a Senior Manager for Indigenous Employment Initiatives, Henry Akenko, who's the Director at Hire Immigrants Ottawa, and Kelly McGahey, who's the Director at Employment Accessibility Resource Network, also known as EARN. So let's dive right in. So I know that each of your employment initiatives really works towards connecting employers with job seekers who they may not be reaching their current practices or reaching with their current practices rather. So can you please maybe tell us a bit more about your initiative, including the partners involved, the resources, and perhaps also the talent pool that you can make the connections to. So Angie, if you can perhaps kickstart this for us, that would be great.
Good morning. Thank you, Somia. Ublakut, Angie Perkins, Yuyunga, Nanatsiavu, Doyunga. Good morning. My name is Angie Perkins, and I am from Nanatsiavu, Labrador. Thank you, Shannon and Somia and RBC for having me here today. Just to give a quick overview, the Indigenous Employment Initiative of United Way East Ontario is funded by the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development in partnership with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition and its affiliate Indigenous organizations here in Ottawa. So we currently have our Indigenous Employment Leadership Advisory Table, or ILAT, which Louise has already mentioned. Thank you, Louise. That had come to fruition in November 2020. So the table is still fairly new, and we have our first table meeting. We had our first table meeting in January of 2021. So we currently have over 30 organizations on the table, which include Indigenous and non-Indigenous representation, which includes service providers, employers, post-secondary education institutions, and various government departments and sectors. So we're very delighted to say that we have not only one representative from our organization table members, but multiple representatives from each table, from each organization for exposure. So the reason why I want to mention that is because I'm really excited to speak about that and our table meetings, because we dedicate about 30 minutes to an hour in the beginning of each of our meetings for learning and knowledge and information sharing about the current Indigenous challenges within the employment sector and national topics of discussion as well. So we have created a number of resource documents specifically for the ILAT table members, which we're going to share in the chat. We also have completed an environmental scan that Shannon or Preeti will post as well. So we are currently in the process of hiring an Indigenous job match coordinator sponsored by RBC, thank you, which is a shared position between the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition as well as United Way. So that position will enable a more targeted approach to support Indigenous job seekers within Ottawa. And lastly, we are currently developing topics for a training session or a series of workshops for employers to ensure cultural safety and inclusive workplaces and what that looks for Indigenous people in employment. Thanks, Somia.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Angie. And I love to kind of hear, and I always do at our check-ins, but this is just phenomenal to hear about the amount of work that goes into ensuring equitable practices in workforce development here. So thank you so much for sharing. Over to you, Henry.
Thank you, Somia, and good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be part of this panel. So High Migrants Ottawa is one of the oldest community-wide initiatives of United Way East Ontario. And our focus is on working with employers to support their capacity to more effectively recruit, hire, and integrate immigrants into skills commensurate positions. But more important to this is, and I can't emphasize this enough, is around the commensurate employment part of it, because this is at the core of addressing issues around inequality and also looking at ways to support employers build inclusive workplace cultures. And thanks very much, Louise, for unpacking some of the issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Louise is a member of Employer Council of Champions. So through our work, we've set up a number of structures to support employers in this respect. Creating a senior level Council of Champions, where senior leadership are championing this work both within their own organizations and in the community, as well as supporting this group as working groups, which also provides an opportunities as an employer peer learning a platform for organizations to learn from each other, small, big, private, and public sector organizations. And the other approach is working as a multi-sectoral initiative to involve other stakeholders, recognizing that the issues we are dealing with are very complex. They are multifaceted in nature and require other groups as well. We work very closely with a network of settlement and service providers to connect employers with immigrant job seekers. We work with groups like the World Skills Employment Center, the Ottawa Immigration Community Services Organization, popularly known as OCISO, the Newcomer Information Center, the Y, Vanier Community Service Center, among others, to make sure that we are able to bridge the needs of employers and the talents that immigrants bring. One of the points I just want to highlight very quickly is throughout the pandemic, we've all understood and come to see the limitations it's imposed on us, including international travels, which affected inbound migration. That notwithstanding, the number of immigrant talent hasn't been affected significantly because the government was proactive in putting in place measures to address this trend by enabling international students and other individuals with temporary visas to be able to transition from those status into permanent residency. So we've seen the numbers continue to stay high. Government a year and a half ago had increased the number of annual intake from over 350 to over 400,000 to meet a 1.2 million number within 3 years across the country. And this has continued apace. So just to tell employers that the talent pool is there. Immigration is one of the largest drivers of labor force growth in the country. And so large numbers of immigrant talent around. We also provide a lot of other specific programs and learning opportunities, which we will delve into as we move forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing there, Henry. And over to you, Kelly.
Good morning, Somia. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here this morning. The Employment Accessibility Resource Network is a community-wide initiative as well, led by United Way East Ontario, and includes Ottawa, Lanark County, Renfrew County, and the United Counties of Prescott Russell. And it's a coordinated access point for education and expertise on employment accessibility and workplace inclusion, connecting employers to support services, programs, and partners. The network is made up of more than 115 members who are employers, again, service providers, and other stakeholders who work in partnership with the goal of increasing employment opportunities for people with disabilities and for promoting inclusive and accessible workplaces. Employer members of the network are committed to fostering a culture of inclusion and accessibility in their workplaces and to providing guidance to other employers in our region. And they're required actually to sign a document recognizing that they are committed to those principles. And I just wanted to give you sort of one practical example of the way the network works. And this is the Earn Job Match call, which is a long-standing program. Somia knows all about these. The purpose of these regular meetings is to provide employers with an opportunity to share information regarding their current or upcoming available job postings, and for service providers to highlight potential candidates for the opportunities and employers in attendance. This is coordinated through a Zoom call. In addition, the meeting provides both parties the opportunity to ask questions related to employment and to follow up on any outstanding potential matches. This is a relatively low investment of time and energy with big impact, and it's one of the hooks of the network for many employers. I also wanted to mention the workshops that Earn has developed. Through the network, we heard from employers that they didn't have access to training to help them to become more accessible. And with input and support from the members of the network, we were able to create this 4-part learning series designed to enhance skills and build confidence in shaping accessible recruitment and job retention practices for people with disabilities. And these workshops are free for any employer in our region to participate in.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And I've definitely had the privilege of facilitating the job match conversations, and it's just spectacular to see the community of practice coming together between service providers and employers, really working towards that workforce development. So that's been phenomenal. And of course, the Shaping Accessible Practices workshop series, certainly very impactful in the way that we've been hearing from the community when they're attending these conversations. So thank you for highlighting those. So each of your initiatives really does seem to focus on a specific demographic, and we can all have multiple layers of identity as well as intersectionality. So can you tell us specifically how the idea of intersectionality is really supported in the work that you're doing? And perhaps explain that concept a bit more for us as well. So Henry, perhaps I can start with you here.
Thank you, Somia, and that's a good question on a very important point. So intersectionality is the way our social identities overlap, and we all have multiple identities. And this can highlight how inequality affects us and in different ways. So if let's take, for example, a female immigrant from Central Africa. She's a Black woman. How does multiple identities affect her when we talk about intersectionality within the labor market, for example? Three quick things come to mind. One is her gender. The other is her race and her immigration status. And I'll just use these three to illustrate the point. So we know from research and statistical data that when it comes to issues around pay equity, women earn less than men. Within that same brackets, if we add another layer of intersectionality on this a female being a woman and a person of color, Black women earn a little less than their Caucasian counterparts. So that's another level. Now, when we add her immigration status, we know immigrants generally tend to earn less than their Canadian counterparts. That's another layer that you add. So these are just three. I could go on and add a few more. Even her name, if she has an ethnic sounding name, that adds another a barrier to her when it comes to accessing employment, because we know 1 out of 4 immigrants with ethnic sounding names would be called for an interview compared to people with Anglo-Saxon names, for example. So these are some of the layers of our identities that come into play when we talk about intersectionality. So for the work we do, it's important to be able to address this, to mitigate these elements of inequality through access to employment, as well as when people are employed into the workplace, how they are treated and how they feel, because retention is very important to an employer. Hiring is great, retention is critical. If you can't keep people and it becomes a revolving door, productivity is affected, and recruitment on itself is a very expensive enterprise. So through the workshops that we deliver to employers, we try to address all of these levels of intersectionality and identities. So for example, called cross-cultural competence workshop deals with issues about interview, how to do culturally competent interviewing, treats topics around unconscious bias, dimensions of inclusiveness, intercultural problem solving. All of these are intended at addressing all these levels and layers of intersectionality to make sure that we're able to reduce bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, issues around discrimination, to make sure that we are breaking down those barriers that brings about inequality. So at a minimum, we can mitigate this and reduce them so that employers can find the best talent, irrespective of who they are and whatever levels of intersectionality and layers of identities that they have. the fostering of workplace culture of inclusion and belonging takes that further and focuses more on how everybody can be involved in this. This is not just about the organization. This is not about the hiring manager. This is not just about the supervisor. It's about everybody in the workplace. How do we create a culture where everybody can feel a sense of belonging, can bring their authentic self to work every day, and be able to contribute at their full potential? We spend more time at work than we spend with our families. So it's important that people feel that sense of belonging, they feel valued, and they feel happy, and to be able to contribute.
Thank you so much, Henry. And I love that piece that you brought about that everyone has a role to play in terms of that accountability piece when it comes to inclusive practices within organizations. And the point that you made about hiring is great, but the retention is really critical in the process. So it's really quite a few things to really reflect, especially for those who are in that process of building their strategies within their organization. So thank you for sharing those critical pieces there. Angie.
Thanks, Somia. I want to mention again the employment gap for Indigenous youth in Eastern Ontario, our scan. And the reason why I want to talk about that again is because within that scan, we had identified a number of sections that actually speak to intersectionality. So as Indigenous peoples, we have endured and continue to endure disparities with the Canadian general public. So with plenty of barriers that already exist, and as these barriers are compounded and looking within the layers, such as gender, LGBTQ2S+, Indigenous men and women in the criminal justice system, mental health and addictions, identified disabilities, the barriers become more exacerbated, and Indigenous people have additional hurdles to overcome. Not to mention that within the intersectionality, we also have to recognize that Indigenous peoples across Canada are not homogenous. We are very distinctions-based people that come with local, regional, and national challenges. So that being said, we also have to work through and within historical systems based on discrimination and disadvantages and systemic racism. I'm just going to go off script for a minute because I want to also identify the fact that even though we're talking about intersectionality, nobody's talking about intersectionality within our own cultural systems. So, I mean, when we talk about, First Nation, Inuit, Métis, nobody's talking about regionalism. Nobody's talking about, your economic status within that. Nobody's talking about the clan systems within First Nations, the language that you speak, and the levels within the language, as well as, 60 scoop survivors, whether you are one or not, residential school survivors, whether you're a descendant or your parent or grandparent were, lateral violence within the Indigenous community, nobody's speaking about. And, as Henry had mentioned, it all goes back to your identity and the layers within. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and boys, as well as, traditionalism, also the Indian Act. So we're taking all of these different types of layers within our own cultural system and then trying to apply them into a broader sense of intersectionality. So that's where the difficulty lies, right? Because a lot of different employers and a lot of, employer seekers, they're also dealing with that within. So, sorry, that's my little rant. I'm just going to move on. But so when it comes to working with employers at different sectors, there's not a single solution to these barriers at all. Until we take the time as employers and as Canadians in a larger sense to learn and understand one another, we cannot get to those best practices or solutions easily. So workplace innovation and diversity, inclusion, it starts at an individual level. We need to listen, learn, and understand within all our places of work to get a better solution for everybody. And we must also recognize that there's not one single solution. Attunement with Indigenous peoples within the workplace comes with plenty of challenges. We need to identify the inefficiencies within the workplace, ask management if you have an Indigenous engagement policy or strategy, and ask why or why not. What is your Indigenous hiring policies and what are your practices and do they exist and why not? And that's it. Thanks, Somia.
Wow, no, No, that was phenomenal. So thank you, Angie. I think there's a lot to really reflect on in terms of the hows, the approaches, really taking a deeper dive into the identity pieces. What is being addressed, what isn't, what is the journey of our organization as we're learning and unlearning some of the practices that are being put in place. So thank you so much for sharing that, Angie. So much of what everyone has mentioned really focuses on the area of traditional employment. And so that idea of employers looking to hire people for roles that they have posted, right? So when we think about community wealth building, one aspect that we often talk about, which is of course the topic for our next webinar, is the community benefits agreements. And community benefits agreements can often contain ideas that include more diverse workforces. So as an example, X percentage of workforce used in the building of a new bridge, for example, will identify as a person who has a disability or people with disabilities. So Kelly, I'm just being cognizant of time as well. So maybe in 2 minutes, if you can share with us how your initiative really helps meet the needs, and or what does the community also need to make this happen, to really drive this forward?
Sure. Thanks, Somia. And I'll speak quickly. So I'm going to talk about, some of the needs and some of the challenges that we have to start with. One of the challenges we have is that we're unsure of what the skill requirements for much of the work that will be coming up under major projects over the next few years will be. At the same time, we don't have great intelligence on the percentage of the labor pool in East Ontario who identify as persons with disabilities, nor what the skill sets of those people are. And issues, as we've sort of talked about, around identity are complex. As new conversations around disability emerge, for example, episodic disability discussions arising from COVID, long COVID. So one thing that would help us to be able to support the adoption of community benefit agreements is better information on projected talent, skill, demand coming forward, so that we can inform persons with disabilities about what sorts of training and skills they may need to develop, and better understanding of the proportion of the labor pool who self-identify, so that we can provide solid guidance to talent acquisition planners on who's available as they develop those agreements. But there are opportunities. I really, really quickly want to look at, so glad Haley talked about social enterprises. An example of a social enterprise that we can think about in terms of community wealth building and
maybe a little bit foggy this morning, but anyway, we'll get through it.
Community benefits are, an example is the Artery Community Roasters. And these are coffee roasters here in Ottawa. All the employees at Artery who are roasting and packaging their coffee are people living with disabilities. The business's mission is to provide great coffee, but really it's around providing stable employment and work experience, paid at a living wage for people living with disabilities. Wages start at $18.60 an hour, increase steadily, and they are working towards providing full-time employment with full benefits to as many people living with various disabilities as they can. So consider the possibility of major new builds. Think of condo or apartment complexes close to LRT stations, for example, to include in their plans space for desirable services such as Artery Roasters or other social enterprises with similar missions like Crackers Catering. And very briefly, another opportunity we're looking at here at EARN is business owners and entrepreneurs as people who make up part of that labor force as well. We're going to create a directory of organizations that are owned or operated by people with disabilities. And while it may be a challenge to determine the parameters, which businesses or organizations count in that, what's created, it will be a resource for those committed to community wealth building principles around sourcing and procurement.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And I love the social enterprise example, specifically to what you alluded to was that living wage, which oftentimes doesn't get discussed, right? So that was a great example. So thank you for sharing there. So lastly, I guess what I wanted to ask every one of you is, how can employers and stakeholders really across the East Ontario region engage in initiatives and really leverage the resource that you have, and that coordinated access, of course, to talent that you facilitate. So very quickly, I'm sorry to cut this off, but maybe 1 minute for each of you, that would be phenomenal. So Angie, if you can start this for us, please.
Thanks, Somia. I'll be quick. Employers and stakeholders are more than willing to contact myself or Kelly Myrtle, actually, who's on the call, for an initial meeting if that's something that you may be interested in. I must note, like many service providers and post-secondary institutions that we do have on our table, our ILAT table ourselves we've had to become gatekeepers, so to speak, to protect Indigenous youth from quota hiring or other types of, check in the box type of hiring initiatives. So we do want to place Indigenous youth or people in workplaces we don't want to place them in places of work that are not culturally safe and inclusive. As we all know, the retention rates for Indigenous employees will reflect that. As an initial point of self-learning, we must also remember that engagement in the Indigenous community and its peoples is constructed on trust and relationship building. Everybody must note that. These are the types of tools and resources we want to be able to expand out for those looking to partner with the Indigenous community as well. My contact information is shared, I do believe, and we're, like I mentioned, we're more than willing to meet with those that are looking to begin or further their relationships with the Indigenous community in regard to employment. Thanks, Somia.
Thank you so much, Angie. Over to you, Henry.
Okay, if I could figure out how to unmute. Thanks, Somia. So there are several ways that employers can engage with HIO, depending upon where their situation is, what their needs are. They can participate in our workshops. We have a number of modules that we deliver. There are 7 in the cultural competency. There are 3 suits in the fostering cultural belonging. I just posted the links in the chat room. It's on our website. We also have the employee peer network through the working groups that they can participate to learn from each other. They can join our coaching and networking events that connect employers and skilled immigrant job seekers, very much similar to the job matching that Kelly described. We also have a number of tools and resources on our websites that they can access as well. And always welcome to contact us directly to have a chat about their needs and how we can support them on an ongoing basis. We tailor our support based on the needs of each workplace, and we would work with them based on what they want and where they are at along their diversity, inclusion, and belonging journey.
Great, thank you for sharing there, Henry. And lastly, Kelly.
So Shannon has put my contact information, EARN's contact information in the chat. The short answer is join. Join the EARN network. There are workshops, of course, to participate in, but it's free to join. We have 3 levels of membership. Happy to have that conversation with you. And I know you're running tight on time, so I'm going to leave that there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, I mean, I would certainly love to continue these conversations, but I'm very cognizant of the time here. What an insightful, raw, and very thought-provoking discussion this has been. So I want to say a huge thank you to Angie and Henry and Kelly for really sharing your thoughts on equitable workforce development and practices here. And keeping time in mind, unfortunately, we don't have any time to take questions, but again, to reiterate and echo what was already shared, resources and contact information on how to access these resources, and of course, connect with our speakers will be shared after the event. And of course, we welcome you to also join our next community wealth building event on community benefits agreements happening on May 17th. So more information, of course, will be shared there. And lastly, encourage you again to participate in the community wealth building at Champions Table. So information will also be shared there as well. So on that note, thank you so much. And I'll pass this over to Shannon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Somia, and to our panelists for sharing your insights and how to access your resources. I know we've placed quite a few pieces of great information in the chat today, so I just want to remind you that you can save the chat by selecting the 3 dots in the chat function and choosing Save Chat, which will save the public, not the private chats, but just the public chats to your device, but we'll also share them in the post-session email. For our last guest today, I want to invite Brian Muzaka to come share a success story. So Brian has been with RBC for over 30 years, with 20 of them in Ottawa. He's currently a community manager for the Island Park Hub in Ottawa and has led the hiring committee for Ottawa Central for the past 4 years. So Brian, over to you.
Great, thank you, Shannon. And it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion today. Today, I'd like to share a story about how employee-led groups have impacted the success of new to RBC staff and the organization. As Shannon mentioned, I help lead the hiring committee in Ottawa Central, and we do our best to recruit from a diverse base, leveraging many of the organizations Louise mentioned in her opening comments. But the recruitment process is just the beginning for new hires. I was happy to hear how Henry mentioned how critical retention is. Reflecting on Louise's opening remarks around being a more inclusive workplace, and specifically her comments around our employee resource groups, it's these ERGs that have helped RBC help individuals understand RBC culture, help RBC better understand them, and help retain employees. Our employee resource groups bring together employees who share a common identity, characteristic, and set of interests. They create a culture of inclusion and that enhances employee engagement and further supports our organizational vision and values. As Louise mentioned, we have many ERGs, and the one I want to speak to you today is about our Indigenous People ERG that we call the Royal Eagles. Royal Eagles provides a support system for RBC employees and acts as a liaison between the bank, its employees, and the Indigenous community. It is a fellowship of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous employees working together to raise awareness and support of Indigenous culture throughout RBC. I've had the pleasure of being an ally of this group for over 20 years. In that time, not only have I seen how the group benefited both the individual and organization, but personally benefited as well. And I'd like to share a couple of examples with you today. The Royal Eagles hold monthly events to connect with fellow members, as well as events that help create awareness and understanding for our non-Indigenous employees. For example, in the past year, they have promoted and educated employees on the 4 Seasons of Reconciliation, Red Dress Day, Orange Shirt Day, and National Indigenous History Month. These initiatives have helped all RBC staff to have a better understanding of Indigenous culture. The second example is the mentorship program that most and almost all of our ERGs have in place. Everyone has an image of banking, or should I say working at a bank. I know after my first week, my head was spinning. There are vaults, rules, regulations, and uptight bankers. Well, maybe just one or two. We try and keep it at a minimum. So when we do our recruiting right and onboard a new employee, we want to keep them. And these are some of the challenges that we have to face. And that's where the Royal Eagles mentorship program steps in and helps RBC, but more importantly, helps the individual to acclimatize. All Indigenous hires are offered to be paired up with an existing Indigenous employee who is there to help them understand RBC culture and support them in their career. In fact, it is even included in the hiring package for self-identified individuals, and they are given a choice to participate, and they can choose to be paired up with an Indigenous or a non-Indigenous mentor. But this also works the other way, where an Indigenous employee can volunteer to be a mentor for non-Indigenous employees, usually a senior people manager. Here in Ottawa, we have one such employee who has been paired up with an RVP in BC. He's new to market, and his market has a large Indigenous client base, and he reached out to the Royal Eagles for their help to help him on how to be a better ally. I personally have been a mentee over the years. When I worked in Manitoba, RBC just opened their first branch on the Peguis Nation, and we, as all senior leaders, got together with the Royal Eagles and went through a cultural awareness training. We got to visit the branch and visit the people, and we all got paired up with a mentor who's helped me throughout the entire career in you know, as Louise mentioned, looking at our unconscious bias and overcoming them. So these are just a couple of examples of how a successful resource group helps to retain employees and create a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Wonderful, and thank you very much for the time here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian. What a great example. And, you know, when I think about what you shared, what really stood out to me is the reinforcement of including employees in the process, as well as community partners, you know, and really highlighting the idea that although the work may not be easy, there are many ways to bring people together, you know, and again, many hands make light work, you know, it often makes me think about that and really focusing on the whole career journey. And we heard that theme, you know, through a few of the speakers today. So again, that idea from recruitment to retirement, it's not just about bringing people on board, but those longer lasting pieces when we think about equitable employment and the tools that we can use along the way. So thank you again so much for joining us today. So as we look towards our next steps and our calls to action, you know, hopefully, you know, you've been emboldened to do something different or to start a conversation or engage in a conversation around these pieces and to find a place for you yourself as an individual or organizationally to play a role as we move forward. And so some of the things we're going to ask for you from today is, you know, leverage United Way's employment initiatives to support your workforce development planning. So thinking about access to talent through local partners, employer education, assessing your current practices. Consider applying the principles of community wealth building into everyday operations. You know, so what does that look like for you? Ask those questions. Think about what Louise talked about at the beginning and those tough questions they asked both individually but organizationally at RBC. Join our community wealth building champions table. We'll share information on that in our follow-up email. And again, a great spot to connect with some of these partners that were here today and ask more questions. Visit our United Way East Ontario Building Community Wealth landing page to learn more and keep up to date on what is happening. And again, we'll share that link in the chat with you. Attend our next webinar in May, which will focus on community benefits agreements. So again, you'll hear that thread of the conversation, which will continue with that. And connect with local resources and buy local when possible. Again, that reinforces, look for those social enterprises in your community that you can support and complete our survey. So I know we'll share the link here in the chat right now, but we will also share it out afterwards. Your feedback is so beneficial to these ongoing conversations and to really understand what journey do you want to go on next and what would you like more information about. And so again, we are so grateful to have everybody here attending today. Thank you so much to our presenters from the session. We couldn't have done it without the sharing that you did throughout the session today. And of course, to my colleagues at United Way who helped to lift up the event itself, the Zoom production, making sure everything went as smoothly as possible. Again, truly appreciate your support through the event today and look forward to seeing everybody when we meet next in May. So have a wonderful day, everybody. And we will share the recording from the session as well if you'd like to revisit the content or share it with others within your networks.
Well done, Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Shannon.
Awesome, Shannon. Well done, team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Awesome.